This presentation intends to highlight the possibilities offered by a multidisciplinary approach to the study of manuscripts. The involvement of specific skills, in this case the philologist Stefanos Kaklamais, the conservator who's speaking, a digital humanities Alberto Campagnolo, and the thought associates experts on multispectral imaging, takes the research to meaningful steps forward. None of those individually would be able to give such a significant increase to the knowledge of such complex work in terms of genesis and conservation events. In October 2018, a team from RB Thought Associates, in partnership with Phase 1, conducted a series of preliminary investigations by multispectral imaging at the Biblioteca Marciana in Venice. The main object of the shooting was Coronelli's globe, which is presented at this conference by Silvia Pugliese, Sara Gottoli, and Michael Toth. But on this occasion, the library submitted a series of other three-dimensional materials illustrated in the slides running in the first part of this presentation. Then some manuscripts were sampled with MSI, including Italiano 9 288, illegible due to a total fade of the text. In that campaign, it was decided to also sample some papers of the manuscript that we present today. It had already been submitted to my attention for advice on the query structure and on the treatments undergone in the past. The Codex Marcianus Gr 7th 22, it has 1466, is an impressive Greek manuscript of Cretan provenance in the collections of the Marciana National Library. The former owner, Giacomo Nani, brought his collection to Venice in the late 18th century. In his collection, the codex had number 244. This number, recorded on the shelf mark label on the page down, appears also on folio 10b verso, that was probably originally set next to the first page of the work. The codex is a chronography ab initio mundi, interweaving biblical, eschatological, and apocalyptic texts, illustrated with more than 400 drawings. According to some internal references, it was composed around 1592. The codex is a paper manuscript of 217 leaves. Georgios Klontzas, a well-known Cretan artist who produced paintings, triptychs, and illuminated manuscripts of fine quality, conceived and produced this manuscript in collaboration with two other scribes, possibly his two sons. The artist pointed out the story to be inserted next to the drawing, with few words, therefore hidden by ink strokes. Besides, two more hands appear in the final part of the codex. On leaves 205 and 6, there is a different text. And for leaf 208, the codex contains only a series of lead and brownish ink drawings. The decoration throughout the whole codex are in iron galling over lead drawings, sometimes leaving the underdrawing untouched. The ink is applied with more or less intensity of color, resulting in different stages of deterioration and perforation of the writing support due to ink corrosion. Some illustrations present a painted frame with pigments and liquid gold applied by brush. The style of these frames varies considerably, possibly as an indicator of different hands at work. The manuscript has undergone at least 2 conservation treatments in 1951 and then in 1976. The only information on the matter that can be found resides in the conservation records of the Abbey of Praia, where there is mention of lining with silk screen, not present anymore, and conservation of the leather binding. Of the second conservation treatment, the library's records merely mention disinfestation procedures and conservation treatments made by the then called Istituto Centrale per la Patologia del Libro in Rome. In the ICPL's photographic archive, which was available online until a few months ago, it was evident by the series of 74 shots that the book was taken apart, treated removing the silk. It was then filled, guarded, and resewn. They made a new leather binding, onlaying the old cover on the new one. These conservation treatments substantially altered the gathering structure. The codex presents a very complex structure, with several smaller folds inserted into the bigger wires and fixed there by multiple sewings. Sometimes then, it looks like that some folios have been matched to form a fold. However, the laying of those matched papers has revealed that originally they could not belong to a single paper form. A series of stains, imprints, and other material evidences, corroborated by textual clues, can be harnessed to reconstruct a probable page order and quire structure. The operation is not always straightforward, due to missing leaf portions and the presence of thick pigment layers in correspondence with the illuminations and the frames.
As mentioned by Claudia, in October 2018, a team from Alberto Associates, Equipos Imaging, and in partnership with Phase 1, offered their services to conduct a series of preliminary investigations through multispectral imaging to examine the manuscript. The digital imaging was carried out with a state-of-the-art technology system using a portable narrowband system with multiple wavelengths. This allowed to gather insights into the fainted and erased text, but also to glean information on the manufacturing history of the manuscript, looking into writing and illumination layering, and to match similar but different inks to analysis of their spectral responses. As we will see, different materials, such as different inks, have different spectral responses. In this page, for instance, the drawings and the annotation have been written with different inks that appear strong under green light. If we look at their spectral response under red light, however, the annotations disappear completely. With statistical analysis of the images and false color visualizations, we can map all the different materials in one image. Note here the different colors for the drawings and the annotations. A different kind of visualization that we can apply to the same multispectral imaging stack is the plotting of the reflectance of different materials under each wavelength. As seen in this slide, different spectral curves indicate different materials. This is a different and more complex page with drawings, text corrections, and decorative additions. The false color image shows the different materials on the page. The detail of the mid-page text shows the text and the drawings executed with the same or similar ink. The deletion is done again with a very similar ink, covering completely the underwriting, so much that it was not possible to read the undertext. Decorative elements were then added on top of the deletions at the time of rubrication. In this slide, we can see the spectral curves for the different materials on the same page. Notice how the deletion and the drawing curves overlap almost completely, indicating that the same ink was used for both. This shape still resembles that of the writing ink, indicating that the same ink or a very similar ink was used for all of these three occasions. If we look instead at the spectral curve of the decoration that was added at the time of rubrication, we can see how this shows a completely different kind of material that was used. So it wasn't the iron gold ink that was used for the drawings and the writing and the deletion. The usefulness of spectral curves becomes even more clear when we compare elements from different images. It's easy to compare materials on the same page, both through spectral curves and through false color imaging, or just by looking at their spectral responses in different wavelengths. But if we want to compare materials from different pages of the same manuscript, or even across manuscripts, this becomes more difficult. A way in which this is more easily attainable is through spectral curves. In this slide, for example, we plotted the inks used in the drawings of a selection of pages from the manuscript. This, of course, was the ink over the lead underwriting. In a similar manner, we have plotted the response of the inks used for the main text on a selection of pages from the manuscript. Again, we see very similar shapes, a couple of outliers. The difference in height, so when it's more towards 1 or more towards 0, if it reflects the same kind of shape, it just indicates a different intensity of the ink. But what's important here to look at is the general shape. And we can see that these are very similar shapes, indicating that inks were either the same or very similar inks used for throughout the text, at least the pages that we took into consideration for the trial. We can then plot both groups into one single diagrams, and we can see how both the drawings, or better the ink on top of the lead drawings, and the text of the main text were written with the same or very similar inks in all the pages that we took into consideration for the trial. You can see how these shapes are all very similar, and they just mainly differ from one to each other from the fact that they lean more towards the 1 point of the reflectance or the 0 point of reflectance, but the general shape is the same. The plot on this slide instead shows the spectral curves for the annotations that we found on the pages. These curves point again to very similar inks. We do have here a couple of outliers that would need further investigations. Either we need to replot this an annotation from the same page to see whether just the particular spot that we took in consideration had some kind of other influence on it. But really what we can see is that all these annotations, for the most part, have been written with the same ink or very similar inks, but this ink is also very different from that used for the main text and the drawings. This instead is again the plotting of that decoration made on top of the deletion on page 5 verso, just to remind us that we also had this other material that was completely different from the inks used both for the overdrawing and the text and the annotations. So the rubrication and these decoration were done with the completely different material, which it's kind of obvious since they actually changed completely color. At CC16, 5 years ago, I presented a work towards a new model to describe and annotate gathering structures of books in codex format, VSCOL. Since then, VSCOL has progressed significantly, with version 2.0 complete with a new and completely revamped visual interface, which we call VC Editor, an interface which is based on this codex, a tool developed by the University of Toronto libraries under the leadership of Alex Gillespie. And this new VC Editor is coming up for formal open release in the next couple of weeks at the time of this recording. So hopefully by the time we will actually be able to see this recording, VSCOL and VC Editor will be up and running, and we can and people will be able to use it. And so based on information that we gathered from the analysis of the layering of the text and the decoration and on the material, we managed to also have analyzed and try to understand how this complex object came to be and map all this information on its current and former gathering structures. VSCOL, in fact, allows us to model gathering structures, even very complex one, as the current structure of the Marcianus Gr 7th 22. And what's important, VSCOL allows us to automatically visualize them. Now, collation structures, gathering structures can also be communicated through collation formulas, but these formulas are very hard to really picture in your head, and when we are dealing with very complex structures, they become really cumbersome, and in fact I would think it almost impossible to just describe this with a formula without any annotation that would explain what things are going on in this very crazy structure. In this particular example, the lines in color highlight leaves that have been joined together during conservation. And as Claudia has mentioned earlier, this structure does not seem to reflect, in fact we know for certain it doesn't reflect the original collation of the manuscript. So, examining the watermarks and the late lines of the leaves, and also other information from the text and the way in which text was layered together, Claudia has reworked the structure, and based on her observation and the observation that we put together for this project, we have proposed a new structure that we think is closer to that the original collation. This is then the new schema for the proposed structure. Again, leaves joined during conservation are mapped in color, while the dotted lines indicate possible missing leaves, the first one on the first square, and blurring signals uncertainty. The mapping and visualization of uncertainty is an important feature of VSCOL, and one that I would say it will set it apart from straight collation formulas, for example. So this presentation just showed us some preliminary results from this archaeological investigation into this codex, and we thank you for your attention, and we are very happy to take your questions now.